Hello and welcome to Politics and Power. Unsurprisingly, we're devoting an entire episode to the fact that the constituency map of the UK now looks a lot like Maggie Simpson. I am of course talking about the general election which took place on Thursday night, where David Cameron and the Conservative Party secured a majority after a whitewash, or I suppose blue wash is probably the better term, which took everybody by surprise. Before all that though, let's take a look at this week's headlines. A photographer captured a moment of joy which showed that Mr Cameron was not the only David celebrating the result on Thursday night. One angry voter decided to mark his ballot paper with the drawing of a penis, but shockingly the vote was still counted as valid. It's by no means the first or the last penis to be drawn on a ballot paper, but Labour have at least agreed they will stop putting balls on theirs. And last but not least, travel company Genius Air are offering free flights out of the country to anyone named Nick Clegg, Nigel Farage or Ed Miliband. It'll be interesting to see if any Nigel Farages out there decide to take them up on the offer, as they presumably get a very warm welcome in Europe. Here's what's coming up on the rest of the show. I'll be joined in the studio by some of the reporters for Winchester News Online who were in the field on the night to talk about the action. Political expert Dr. William Sheward gives us his analysis of the election. Then Calum Warren-Piper will be with me to discuss what happens next for the country. But first, in case you somehow managed to miss any of the news on election night itself, don't worry, because Winchester News Online were reporting live all night. Let's take a look at some of the key moments.
We have just got in BBC's exit poll. As it stands, if this exit poll is correct, David Cameron would hold the majority of seats on 316.
Okay, so I'm with Patricia Gulligan, who is a youth candidate for Eastleigh. Patricia, seat winnable?
Oh, absolutely. I'm here to win.
Labour are set to lose a seat after seat in Scotland, and they do not seem to be making compensating gains in England.
And Nigel Farage has lashed out at the Tory press, particularly the Daily Mail, for telling the UKIP people to vote Tory.
As Jim Murphy, the leader of Scottish Labour, lost his seat, East Frenshire.
We have some more breaking news, and for more on this, we have Alex Delaney in Eastleigh.
At the moment we're hearing a lot of speculation that Ed Miliband may be due to resign tomorrow. One of the quotes we've seen is that within 24 hours Ed Miliband could be gone.
I'm very sure that Ed Miliband will be our leader now and long into the future.
I do hereby declare that Mims Davies is duly elected Member of Parliament for Eastleigh. Thank you.
Two parties were in the coalition. We have one that is obviously expected to do very well tonight, and we have another that we don't need to expect. It's obvious they're doing very, very badly.
This morning we were talking about this as going down as one of the closest elections we've ever seen, and now it looks like we're going to be talking about a bit of a whitewash.
And finally, we can bring you the end results of the 2015 general election. David Cameron's Conservative Party romped home with a majority of 331 seats across the country. The Labour Party secured 232 seats, whilst the Liberal Democrats only managed 8 seats, a huge 49-seat loss since 2010. The Greens and UKIP both secured 1 seat apiece.
And with me in the studio now to discuss what it was like covering all that live are Emma Wright, who was reporting from Southampton, and Laura Harding, who was reporting from Brighton Pavilion. Guys, thank you very much for joining me. How are we feeling? We all recovered from a very exhausting night?
It was very long. It was really long. But yeah, feeling a bit less tired.
Yeah, Laura?
Yeah, feeling good.
Okay, good. So Laura, you were in Brighton. Caroline Lucas held on to her seat. What was it like when you were there? Did you get a sense that she was going to hang on?
Yeah, the atmosphere in the air, they seemed pretty confident, but they did keep to themselves. In general, the press was kept from the count room, but they weren't interested in talking to people. Even the activists, everyone pretty much kept themselves very quiet, I think.
There was a lot of speculation beforehand that Labour might actually take the seat. It was a big target for them. Was there a sense of that on the night?
There was, because especially the other 2 seats in Brighton, Kemp Town and Hove, they were big Labour targets as well. So it was quite tense in the air, especially with Labour there. So yeah, it was exciting.
And Emma, you were down in Southampton. How much of a shock was the result there? Labour have held that seat since 1992, so presumably a big shock.
Yeah, well, I don't think anyone expected it. We could see the results from the balcony. We could see the ballot papers being lit up. We could see it happening before it was there. We were all, oh my God, he's won. But yeah, when I interviewed him afterwards, he said, yeah, I totally expected it to be Rowena. Didn't expect it to be me at all. And
do you think that John Denham deciding to step down had an effect on the result at all?
Yeah, really do. He has been known there for 23 years. Then to step down, have this new face come in. Obviously, it sounds really like sexist, but she's a woman as well. So, and Royston's been trying for this seat for 8 years. And even last time he ran, the margin was roughly 0.5%. So it was extremely close last time. Yeah, he said that as well, and he was like, just the fight has been so long for him that he's really pleased he's now won it. And Laura, the Greens, looking at a national scale, they didn't do as well as they would hoped. They obviously only held on to that one seat which they already had. They were hoping to get a couple more. Do you think this election is a failure for them? No, not at all, especially this Green surge they've had. That's really, given them a lot of confidence, built more of a reputation for them. And if you look at the actual statistics, they got over 1 million votes across the country. So I think in the next few years to come, they're going to build up a bigger kind of following, more support. And we saw they beat the Lib Dems this time around in 126 seats, whereas in the last general election they only managed to beat them in 1. We've seen that their membership has quadrupled in just a year. Do you think this is a sign that they could replace the Lib Dems as the left-wing anti-establishment party? Not necessarily. I think calling them left-wing, yeah, that's fine, but they're not similar parties at all. And I think it's fair to say that the Lib Dems will kind of go back to being that kind of we've got nothing to lose sort of party now. So it's all up in the air at the moment, but no, I don't think that'll happen. When that exit poll came out at around 10 o'clock that sort of predicted the result that no one had seen coming. For 6 months we'd seen all the polls suggesting that it was going to be neck and neck, and then the exit poll came out and just sort of blew all that out of the water. What was the reaction where you guys were when that exit poll came out? Everyone said take it with a pinch of salt. Like, I spoke to the UKIP, I spoke to Lib Dems, and even Royston himself said take it with a pinch of salt. So Laura, what about where you were? Did this exit poll have an effect there on the atmosphere or the mood at all? The Hove and Kemp Town seats were Labour Conservative marginals, and even when the results came out, they were very, very close. So it was really surprising, especially because the different pollsters gave different results for the exit polls. But the general kind of gist of it, it was really surprising. And like you said, it was to take it with a pinch of salt. So yeah, it was a bit of a shock. Emma, Laura, thank you very much for joining me. Earlier, I spoke to political expert Dr. William Sheward. So William, thank you very much for joining me. Pleasure. First of all, I thought we'd discuss the different parties, the way they approached the election, sort of their tactics during the campaign, how effective you think they were. I guess starting off with the Conservatives seems a good place to start. Yeah, I think what they were aiming to show very clearly that the economy was recovering and they had saved the economy from Labour, and that was the message they gave, rightly or wrongly. I think a lot of economists would say that wasn't actually true. The economy was in such a desperate strait in 2010 as the Conservatives made out. But they gave them a narrative. We've saved the economy, don't let Labour wreck it. It's an easy message to understand whether or not it's true or not, and that's very helpful. For Labour, you've got the opposite problem. You've got to try and show people that actually the economy was not in a mess, but that means you've got to explain yourself, and that's actually difficult to do. So I don't think they had a clear message. They wanted to play on the inequality issue, they wanted to play on cuts. I think what they were looking for, though, was, and this, some would say this was a mistake, others would say it was the right thing to do in this, under the circumstance. You go for what's called a base election. You get your core vote out, and you think that 35% will be enough to get you, if not majority, the largest party, and then you're in the position to do the negotiations from a position of strength for a future coalition. For the Liberals, they probably thought in their heart of hearts, they never say it, this is an election we're not going to do very well. Do you think they would have expected to be wiped out as as they were? Well, sometimes it's sort of whistling in the graveyard sort of bit. You're sort of trying to make yourself feel better when you're sort of marching into the guns, so to speak. I think they were saying publicly we're going to lose 30. Now, if you take politicians at their word, then they may generally have thought that was true. Clearly they want to make their supporters keen, probably realising that 30 was absolutely top end and it was more likely to be close to the wipeout that was actually suggested. But no political party can go into an election like that. The wipeout in Scotland by the SNP
40, how much of an effect do you think that had on Labour's campaign?
Of the 41 they had, they're going to lose, they must have thought, at least 30 of those, and probably actually in the heart of hearts thinking we actually could get completely wiped out. And in the end, actually, probably thought at the end of the night, ending up with one wasn't so bad. So that means you've got 40 seats you're not going to get. So you, at the very least then you think, well, we're going to get those other 40 from. And I think they could really only hope that, again, you couldn't say this in a campaign, we need those SNP votes, not in the coalition, not for a deal, but if we then get into government, we can rely on them for a lot of votes to do with the economy. The tricky thing was for their campaign, we cannot say that in an election, that we're going to rely upon the SNP. And I think, that, of course, that's something that Conservatives played very well on.
Do you think Euroscepticism played a part in this election, and if so, how much?
I don't think it was there as much as it might have. It may have been there because it's been so ingrained over the last few years. It didn't overtly come out in the campaign. I think Cameron had managed to, potentially quite cleverly, I think looking to the future problematically, is you've now got this EU referendum in the next couple of years, and nobody knows the format of this. I mean, what form it's going to take. Does it have to go through some sort of parliamentary legislation? How is it going to be organised? Those things are all really very difficult. And of course, if there is an EU referendum, there's a strong feeling that English nationalism wants to get out of Europe. What's Cameron's position in the Conservative Party? Are they in favour of staying in? He knows also if this election takes place for a referendum, he knows Nicola Sturgeon is saying it needs to be what's called a double lock, that it needs to be a vote for getting out in England and also in favour of getting out in Scotland, and he's already turned that down. So that's storing up problems with Scotland. It's also going to store up problems with his own backbenchers who are now saying we're free of the Liberal Democrats, we can do exactly what we want, and they're going to demand something because the majority is small and they say if you don't do what we want on this issue, we can make life difficult for you. So I think there's I'm sure the honeymoon period, I think one or two of the papers saying already, is almost over because you're getting into these issues and you said you're going to have them. There's going to be a discussion about the nature of the EU referendum, but you can't get out of doing it now. So I think in answer to your question, the fact that he talked about in and out referendum probably pushed a lot of people away from UKIP and back to the Conservatives, in addition to the SNP question as well. Whether that stores up problems for the future, it may well have been enough to get them through this election.
Okay, William, thank you very much.
That's a pleasure. Thanks very much.
And I'm joined in the studio now by Calum Warren-Piper. Calum, thanks for joining me. Well, I hope you've chosen a suitably good stat this week, considering it's the last time we'll be doing this.
It's our last, yep, and I've got, well, a good one, I suppose. The stat of this week is £88,000.
Something election-related, I assume.
Oh, of course election-related, but can you guess what?
£88,000. I know the deposit that Lib Dems lost was something like 176,000 in the end, so it's not that.
£88,000 is the golden handshake payoff that Ed Balls is getting for not winning his seat.
Wow.
It's part of £11.5 million worth of public spending money that will go towards MPs that were not re-elected.
£88,000 for not winning a seat?
Yeah.
I think there's a career in that.
Yeah, I could live off £88,000, I think.
Definitely. So, let's talk about the election and where that leaves us for the next 5 years. What can we expect to see?
Well, we know we're getting cuts. It's, you know, the degree of cuts that people are all talking about. How bad are these cuts going to be? Is it going to be Thatcher-esque? Is it, you know, is it going to be the worst cuts we've ever seen? But George Osborne predicted that we would have a surplus of money by 2017 with the current, you know, cuts that are being taken and the current cuts that are supposed to be implemented. So you can't help but think that when it comes that, you know, the budget is released and that we're actually making money and we're finally out of the red and into the black, that we would start to see some investment, you know, in, you know, areas that people want to see investment in.
And what about the appointments that he's made to his cabinet so far? So, you know, May is staying as the Home Secretary, which isn't a surprise really. You've got Philip Hammond remaining as Foreign, Michael Fallon remaining as Defence. There's no real surprises there. Yeah, but then we've had
it's all fairly
to Justice Secretary, an odd move, is it not?
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't sure whether or not Cameron was going to try and keep Gove out of the limelight after the kind of debacle that he had with the Education Secretary, and then he would kind of move to Chief Whip, and then, you know, since then he's kind of, you know, been in the shadows, and now to put him back into the limelight of something like Justice Secretary, it's a very bold move. But all the other appointments seem fairly predictable. I
mean, Osborne replacing Haig, that was always
that
obvious
was
from the outset. Do you think that's going to have an effect on the popularity. Haig was actually quite well liked, whereas Osborne's popularity isn't quite so high as he's seen as the bogeyman that's brought in all these cuts, whereas Haig didn't really have that same reputation.
Haig did kind of have had a kind of working man's attitude about him, which I think for the Conservatives is very important.
Is that Osborne's been predicted by a lot of people, along with May and Boris Johnson, of course, as a contender for the next leader. Do you think the fact that he doesn't have a great popularity is against him in this respect?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that we kind of are entering much more of a US-style politics in the UK. We need, and you've seen after the election all these tweets about how David Cameron is trying very hard to be like Barack Obama. Whether or not George Osborne could, perform like David Cameron has in the debates and all, recovering from gaffes, etc. We've never really gotten the opportunity to see that.
I think in this election, it almost became not who does the public like most, but who is least unpopular with the public, which probably in a way would have benefited Osborne, whereas you have to feel that Labour and the Lib Dems now will recognise that, and they will select leaders who are going to be likeable, because although it shouldn't be a popularity contest, as you say, that is almost what it's becoming. Do you think the Conservatives will have to consider that?
It'll probably be quite far back in their minds, although the honeymoon period, as it's been called, is kind of over, and that the Conservatives will be wanting to kind of get to work and start making some action happen. They can't kind of neglect the idea that they're going to need a new leader eventually, and whether or not they currently have one, either in Osborne or Boris Johnson, or it's not remiss to say that there could be a female leader of the Conservatives. I mean, all the female leaders of the current political parties still have their jobs. And
two of the favourites for Labour and Lib Dem, of course, are leaders
the
females. Yeah. So. And on that topic then, resignations of Clegg and Miliband, and Farage, we've now just learned just a few hours ago, actually isn't gone because he was overruled.
He was rejected.
They've rejected his resignation, which seems bizarre to me, but there you go.
I'm sure Miliband and Clegg will be on a beach somewhere wishing the same had happened to them.
Just sat there quietly thinking, come on guys.
A bit quiet. But
so the resignations of Clegg and Miliband, at least, do you think that was necessary?
It's strange, we have entered this kind of era of politics kind of very much like football. If you don't get the results, you get the job. And it seems very harsh to me because Miliband, fought well. Clegg was, the Lib Dems did take a real hammering this election, and the amount of seats they lost and the percentage that you've seen kind of over the years is harrowing.
For your mind, do you think Miliband should have stayed on and tried again, or do you think Labour have to take a new direction?
I think they probably need to go in a new direction. I mean, they need to recover, of course, from this, and that will take time in itself. But they're always going to be pushing the working man's party and the working man's kind of politics. But whether or not he was the right person to get it across, well, clearly not at the moment. Have they got anyone better? I'm not sure.
And what about, a lot of people have been commentating saying that if we'd have had a different system, that if we'd have had proportional representation, that Labour and other parties, UKIP especially, would have done a lot better than they did, and that would have been a lot fairer.
I thought it was going to go down to, numerous deals between
coalitions, who sided with who.
Multi-party coalitions. But the fact that it was a majority, and then you've seen all these protests, etc. afterwards, and you've got UKIP saying that it was conspiracy. It all seems like kind of they're a bit sour, really, because...
I mean, the protests in London are kind of not redundant in a way, but a little bit overblown, I think, because even if you did have this electoral reform and we did go to proportional representation, the Conservatives still would have won the election. They still would be the biggest party in Parliament. So protesting against electoral reform, that seems fair enough. There are good arguments for that. But protesting against the government that are in power and saying that's undemocratic seems a little bit backwards.
Very sour. And, we had a referendum for alternative vote, and the people back then voted for it to stay the same. It's, similar to Scotland voting that they still want to be in the Union. I mean, I can understand the surge towards SNP now because they want, more powers, etc. But when the discussion about alternative voting comes up, we had a referendum quite recently, and you can't. I mean, I know we'd love the ability to have referendum after referendum after referendum, but it's just not plausible. You know, we're going to have the one in 2017 to stay in Europe, hopefully. And but I think, yeah, I find it very, you know, strange that people are complaining about the voting system when we had, you know, such a majority government that has just been elected in. And even if we didn't, you know, as you said, the Conservatives still would have won. Okay, well, Calum, thank you very much, as always. And finally, our story of the week, our favourite item from the world of news. And as we started with a pig-related story in the first episode, we thought it was only appropriate that we should end with one. So our story this week is a mayoral candidate in Flint City, Michigan, who has been hogging the limelight. Giggles the Pigs campaign attracted huge media attention after lawyer Michael Ewing entered him to satirise the idea of a write-in campaign. In these tough economic times, it's good to see that someone is bringing home the bacon. And that's all for this episode, and it's goodbye from myself and Calum. But fear not, while it's the last you'll see of us, it's not the last you'll see of the show, with a new team excited to take the reins soon. Thank you for watching, and good night.